Katherine stood at a charity gala in Manhattan. Her simple borrowed dress felt inadequate among designer gowns surrounding her in the glittering ballroom. Whispers cut through classical music like knives. Wealthy guests stared at her with cold judgment. Their eyes pierced through her with obvious disdain. Women in pearls and diamonds circled her like predators. Their smiles were sharp and calculated. They had come to destroy her publicly. "Fortune hunter," one woman announced loudly. Her voice dripped with venom. The insult was designed to wound Katherine in front of everyone. "Alexander Stone's charity project," another added with cruel laughter. The room erupted in mocking agreement. Katherine felt each word like blows. Katherine kept her chin raised despite trembling hands. Poverty hadn't broken her. Widowhood hadn't destroyed her. These strangers wouldn't break her either. A woman in emerald stepped forward, holding champagne. Her expression was pure malice. She wanted to humiliate Katherine beyond words. The woman threw champagne intentionally onto Katherine's dress. Cold liquid soaked through fabric. Gasps and cruel laughter erupted around them instantly. Laughter surrounded Katherine like suffocating walls. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. They wouldn't see her break. Her mind flashed back 6 months. A small town in Oregon. A cafe where she met him. Simple conversation that changed everything. The memory vanished. Katherine stood alone in humiliation. Waitress klinging. Laughter still echoing cruelly around her in the ballroom. Heavy footsteps echoed across marble. Laughter died suddenly. Whispers shifted from mockery to shock as someone powerful approached through the crowd. Alexander Stone strode through the crowd. His expression thundered with protective rage. Steel gray eyes found Katherine immediately among hostile faces. He pushed past women without hesitation. His hand found Katherine's, trembling one immediately. Warm, solid, protective, claiming her before every watching eye. Alexander turned to face the crowd. His voice cut through the ballroom like ice. "How dare you?" he said coldly, interrupting their insults. Complete silence fell across the ballroom. Every eye fixed on the billionaire CEO. He pulled Katherine closer protectively with clear, loving intention. "I love this woman," Alexander declared clearly in front of everyone. His voice carried authority and truth that silenced all mockery instantly. "And we are going to be married," he announced firmly to the entire room. The declaration hit like thunder in complete silence. The room went into total shock. Jaws dropped. Whispers exploded everywhere. The most powerful man in Manhattan was marrying the woman they'd humiliated. Alexander held Katherine close. "But our story didn't start here. It started in a place where money meant nothing," he said. Their journey was about to be told from the very beginning. A story proving love transcends all barriers and society's cruel judgments. 6 months earlier, Alexander Stone arrived in Pinewood, Oregon, driving a simple rental car that looked completely ordinary and unremarkable. He had left Seattle behind, desperate to escape the relentless stress of running his billion-dollar investment company and the suffocating pressure of constant board meetings, corporate decisions, and people demanding his time and money every single moment. The weight of his empire had become unbearable, pushing him toward exhaustion and burnout that threatened to consume him completely. He needed silence, anonymity, and space to breathe away from the billionaire CEO identity that defined every interaction in his corporate world. Pinewood promised exactly that precious escape. Alexander parked on Main Street and noticed a small cafe with warmth radiating from its windows like a beacon to weary travelers seeking refuge. The establishment looked like it had served this community for decades, the kind of place where locals gathered daily and strangers were welcomed without suspicion or judgment about their past. He stepped inside, grateful to be just another anonymous customer seeking coffee and quiet rather than the powerful CEO that everyone in Seattle either feared, envied, or wanted to exploit for personal gain. The bell above the door chimed softly, announcing his arrival to the nearly empty afternoon space with its worn but clean tables and chairs. Katherine looked up from wiping down the counter as the bell chimed, her warm brown eyes meeting his tired gray ones across the small, intimate space. She smiled genuinely, not the practiced customer service smile he encountered in expensive Seattle restaurants, but real authentic warmth that reached her eyes and made him feel immediately welcomed and valued as a person. "Sit anywhere you'd like," she called out kindly, grabbing a laminated menu from behind the well-worn counter. Alexander chose a booth near the window where afternoon sunlight streamed through glass, casting golden patterns across the wooden table that spoke of years of community conversations and simple, honest human connection. Katherine approached his table with the menu and a glass of ice water, her movements efficient but unhurried, like someone who genuinely enjoyed serving others rather than just working for tips to survive. "Welcome," she said warmly, placing the menu before him with a friendly smile. "Can I get you started with some coffee or something else to drink?" Alexander nodded gratefully, surprised by how her authentic kindness affected him after months of superficial interactions where everyone wanted something from him. "Coffee would be perfect. Thank you so much," he replied quietly, noticing immediately how she treated him like any other customer with simple human decency rather than trying to impress or extract favors. Katherine returned with fresh hot coffee and took his order, but instead of rushing away to other tasks, she lingered when he asked about the town with genuine, curious interest. They fell into easy, natural conversation about Pinewood, about the quiet beauty of small-town life where neighbors knew each other's names and looked out for one another through good times and bad. Alexander found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't experienced in years, drawn to her authenticity and the way she spoke without artifice, pretense, or hidden agendas behind her words. She was real in a way nobody in his world ever was anymore. They talked about life, about dreams and aspirations despite difficult circumstances that tried to crush hope and ambition. Katherine spoke about her grandmother who was sick, requiring expensive medical care that strained their very limited family resources beyond what they could reasonably afford. She mentioned working to help with medical bills and daily expenses, about the financial struggles that came with loving someone through serious illness and slow decline. But there is absolutely no self-pity in her words, no attempt to gain his sympathy or make him feel obligated to help with money. She simply shared her reality with quiet, dignified strength that Alexander found completely captivating and refreshingly genuine. Alexander shared carefully edited stories about his own life, about pressure and expectations and loneliness that came with success, though he deliberately avoided revealing the true massive extent of his wealth and power that would certainly change how she perceived and treated him. Katherine listened with genuine interest and empathy, asking thoughtful questions that showed she cared about him as a person rather than what he could provide materially. They discovered shared perspectives on life, on finding meaning beyond material success, on the importance of authentic human connection in an increasingly superficial world. Her laughter was unguarded and beautiful, a sound that made something in Alexander's chest tighten with unfamiliar emotion. Alexander stayed at the cafe far longer than necessary, long after his coffee grew cold and his simple meal was finished and generously paid for with cash. He watched Katherine work with quiet efficiency and genuine care for each customer who entered, treating everyone with the same warmth and respect regardless of their appearance, order size, or social status. Something profound had shifted inside him during their conversation, something he hadn't felt in years of shallow relationships and purely transactional interactions in Seattle's elite circles where everyone had ulterior motives. As he finally stood to leave, he knew with absolute certainty that he would return tomorrow, drawn by something far deeper than good coffee. Alexander returned to the cafe every single day for the entire week he stayed in Pinewood, his originally planned brief 2-day escape from Seattle extending as he found reasons to remain longer than initially intended. Each visit brought longer, deeper conversations with Katherine during her slower afternoon shifts when few other customers demanded her attention and time. He learned about her values, her faith, her determination to maintain hope and kindness despite circumstances that would have broken weaker people completely. She learned about his loneliness despite outward success, about the burden of expectations, though he still carefully protected the secret of his true identity and massive wealth that would inevitably change everything between them. On his last day in Pinewood, Alexander sat in what had become their usual booth, anxiety building in his chest about leaving this unexpected precious connection behind in this small town. When Katherine finished her shift and joined him briefly with her own cup of coffee, he gathered his courage and spoke carefully. "I'd really like to keep in contact with you, if that's okay," he said, his voice carrying more genuine vulnerability than any high-stakes business negotiation ever had. "Could I have your number?" Katherine hesitated visibly, her warm brown eyes studying his face as if carefully weighing the wisdom of maintaining connection with this stranger who'd wandered into her small-town life and would return to his own world. But she felt it too, that rare, genuine connection neither of them wanted to lose despite logic and caution warning against it. She accepted, sensing something real and precious between them, writing her number on a napkin with a small, hopeful smile. Alexander returned to Seattle, but the city that had once defined his entire existence now felt hollow and suffocating in ways it never had before his trip to Pinewood. His penthouse apartment in the tallest building downtown, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering cityscape, felt more like an expensive prison than a home worth living in anymore. The silence there was different from Pinewood's peaceful quiet. This was the silence of isolation and loneliness that money couldn't fill no matter how much wealth he accumulated. He couldn't stop thinking about Katherine, about her warm brown eyes, her genuine laughter, her quiet strength facing struggles he'd never had to endure himself. Alexander sat in his corner office at Stone Investments, surrounded by the trappings of immense success and power that had once brought him deep satisfaction. Board reports sat unread on his mahogany desk, while his phone rested in his hand, Katherine's number saved but not yet called. He found himself distracted during crucial meetings, his mind drifting to conversations in a small-town cafe instead of the multi-million-dollar deals his partners discussed with increasing frustration. Alexander had built an empire through focus and determination, but now a woman from a small Oregon town occupied his thoughts more than quarterly earnings reports ever could. That evening, Alexander finally gathered courage to call Katherine's number, his heart pounding in ways it never did during high-stakes negotiations worth hundreds of millions. The phone rang 3 times before her familiar warm voice answered, slightly breathless, as if she'd rushed to catch the call. "Hello," she said, and Alexander felt tension release from his shoulders at hearing her voice again. They talked for over 2 hours that first night, conversation flowing as easily as it had in the cafe, maybe even easier without physical distance interrupting them. Katherine laughed at his stories about Seattle's rain, and Alexander found himself smiling genuinely for the first time since returning. Their phone conversations became a sacred, nightly ritual over the following month, a time both protected fiercely from other obligations. Alexander called after his late business meetings ended around 10 o'clock, and Katherine answered after putting her daughter Mia to bed and finishing evening routines in their small apartment. They shared intimate details about their days, their deepest thoughts, their dreams for futures that seemed increasingly intertwined despite massive distance separating them. Alexander still hadn't revealed his true identity as a billionaire CEO, deliberately letting Katherine believe he was simply a moderately successful businessman with comfortable income. The deception weighed on him, but fear of losing her genuine affection kept him silent. Katherine found herself looking forward to Alexander's calls with anticipation she hadn't felt since losing her beloved husband 3 years ago. His voice brought comfort and excitement simultaneously, a powerful combination she'd thought lost forever after such devastating loss. They talked about everything, deep philosophical discussions about life's meaning mixed with silly debates about movies and music that made her laugh until her sides ached. She could feel herself falling deeply for him despite the reasonable voice in her head warning about complications of long-distance relationships. Her best friend Jennifer noticed the change, how Katherine smiled more, how hope had returned to her eyes after years of just surviving day to day. After a full month of nightly phone calls that left him desperately craving more than just her voice, Alexander made a decision that surprised even himself. He would invite Katherine to visit him in Seattle for a weekend, finally closing the painful physical distance between them. He planned the invitation carefully, not wanting to seem too forward or make her uncomfortable with expectations she might not be ready to meet. That evening during their call, he gathered his courage and asked if she would consider coming to Seattle. "I'd really love to see you again," he said quietly, vulnerability clear in his voice. "Would you be willing to visit for a weekend? I'd cover the travel costs." Katherine felt her breath catch when Alexander invited her to Seattle, her heart pulling her toward accepting while her mind raised concerns about money, childcare for Mia, and vulnerability of taking this relationship to the next level. She had been carefully saving tips for emergencies, and this felt important enough to use those funds. "I appreciate the offer, but I can cover my own bus fare," she said with quiet dignity, not wanting to feel like charity or be indebted to him financially. "I'll need to arrange childcare for Mia, but yes, I'd love to come visit you." Alexander felt his chest tighten at her independence and strength, falling for her even more deeply in that moment of gentle refusal of his financial help. 2 weeks later, Katherine stood at Pinewood's bus station, clutching a small overnight bag containing her nicest clothes. Mia hugged her tightly, making Katherine promise to call when she arrived safely. Jennifer gave her an encouraging smile and whispered advice about being careful but open to happiness. "You deserve this," Jennifer said firmly, squeezing her hand. "Let yourself feel again." Katherine boarded the bus with butterflies in her stomach, watching Pinewood disappear behind her as the bus carried her towards Seattle and Alexander and possibilities she'd thought closed forever after becoming a widow. The 6-hour journey gave her plenty of time to think, to pray, to hope this wasn't a mistake, but rather a new beginning. Alexander waited at Seattle Station, more nervous than he'd been in years despite his usual supreme confidence. When Katherine stepped off the bus, her chestnut hair catching afternoon sunlight and those warm brown eyes finding his immediately across the crowded platform, his breath caught. She smiled, genuinely happy to see him, and he crossed the distance quickly, pulling her into a warm embrace that felt both natural and electrically charged. "You made it," he said softly against her hair, breathing in her familiar scent. Katherine laughed, slightly overwhelmed by the intensity of seeing him again in person after a month of just voices over phone lines. "I did," she agreed, pulling back to look at his face. "It's really good to see you, Alexander." Over the weekend, Alexander took Katherine to simple places deliberately chosen to avoid his usual expensive haunts. They visited Pike Place Market, walked along the waterfront watching ferries, ate at a casual neighborhood Italian restaurant, saw a movie at a small theater. Katherine felt completely at ease, seeing Alexander relax in ways she sensed he rarely did normally. As sunset approached their second evening together, Alexander drove them to a scenic overlook with stunning views of Seattle spread below like twinkling lights. They stood at the railing, hands finding each other naturally. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you," Alexander admitted quietly, turning to face her. Katherine's heart raced as she looked up at him. "Me neither," she whispered. When his lips met hers, soft and tentative, then deepening with passion, Katherine felt something frozen inside her finally thaw. She found something special, rare, worth protecting. Alexander held her close afterward, simultaneously elated and terrified because he was falling deeply in love but hadn't told her the truth about who he really was, and that deception might eventually destroy everything beautiful growing between them. Katherine returned to Pinewood after a weekend in Seattle, her heart full from the time spent with Alexander, but reality waiting to pull her back to earth. Her grandmother Margaret's health had been declining steadily, requiring more care and attention than ever before. Katherine resumed her 2 jobs immediately, working at the market in the mornings and the cafe in the afternoons, squeezing in time to check on Margaret between shifts and care for Mia in whatever hours remained. The weekend in Seattle felt like a beautiful dream, But this was her real life, filled with responsibilities and struggles that couldn't be escaped no matter how much she wished otherwise. Margaret's condition worsened noticeably over the following week. She struggled with basic tasks, her breathing labored, her energy depleted in ways that frightened Katherine deeply. The local doctor recommended specialists and treatments that their limited insurance wouldn't cover, costs that seemed impossibly high for Katherine's modest income despite working constantly. Margaret insisted she was fine, not wanting to burden her granddaughter, but Katherine saw the truth in her grandmother's tired eyes and weakening body. The woman who had raised her with such strength and love was fading, and Katherine felt helpless to stop it. Katherine talked to Alexander every night as promised, their phone calls becoming the anchor that kept her grounded through increasingly difficult days. During one conversation, she finally shared the full extent of Margaret's declining health and the overwhelming medical costs she faced. "Let me help," Alexander said immediately, his voice filled with genuine concern and desire to ease her burden. "I have resources, Katherine. Please let me arrange for better medical care for your grandmother." Katherine felt tears burn her eyes at his kindness, but she couldn't accept. "I appreciate that more than you know," she said quietly. "But I need to do this myself. Margaret raised me to stand on my own 2 feet. I can't take money from you, Alexander." Alexander wanted to argue, to insist, to simply fix the problem with money that meant nothing to him, but could mean everything to Katherine and Margaret. But he heard the steel beneath Katherine's gentle refusal, the pride and independence that were part of who she was at her core. "I understand," he said finally, respecting her wishes even as it killed him to stand by helplessly. "But if you change your mind, the offer stands. Always." After they hung up, Alexander sat in his penthouse, wrestling with frustration and helplessness. He could buy companies worth billions, but couldn't help the woman he was falling in love with because she wouldn't let him, and he respected her too much to violate her clearly expressed boundaries. But Alexander couldn't do absolutely nothing while Margaret's health deteriorated. The next morning, he made careful arrangements through his connections in the medical field. He contacted the best specialists in Seattle, explaining Margaret's case through her medical records he obtained legally through proper channels. He arranged for them to provide remote evaluation and consultation with Pinewood's local doctors, structuring it so Katherine would never know he was behind the help. The specialists would offer their services through a legitimate medical foundation program that existed independently, nothing that would raise suspicion or make Katherine feel obligated to him. It was the most he could do while respecting her expressed wishes about not accepting his money directly. 2 more months passed with Alexander and Katherine maintaining their relationship across the distance between Seattle and Pinewood. They talked every single night without fail, sometimes for hours, sometimes just brief check-ins when Katherine's exhausting schedule left her barely able to keep her eyes open. Alexander visited Pinewood twice more, staying at the small local inn and spending time with Katherine during her limited free hours. He met Mia properly, winning the 7-year-old over with genuine kindness and patience. He met Margaret briefly, the elderly woman studying him with sharp eyes that saw more than Katherine realized, nodding approval at his obvious care for her granddaughter despite whatever secrets he was keeping hidden. During one of their nightly phone calls, Katherine's voice suddenly changed mid-sentence, filled with panic that made Alexander's blood run cold instantly. "Alexander, I have to go," she said urgently, voice breaking with fear. "Margaret just collapsed. The ambulance is coming, but I need to get to the hospital right now." The line went dead before Alexander could respond, leaving him standing in his penthouse holding a phone and feeling utterly helpless thousands of miles away. Katherine was desperate, terrified of losing the grandmother who had raised her, and he was too far away to be there for her. He immediately called his assistant despite the late hour. "Get the jet ready now," he said tersely. "I need to be in Pinewood, Oregon immediately." Alexander's private jet was ready within 90 minutes. The sleek, luxurious aircraft representing wealth Katherine had absolutely no idea he possessed. He sat in the leather seat as the plane took off into the night sky, his mind racing with worry about Margaret's condition and about Katherine discovering the truth when she saw this jet land in Pinewood. His carefully maintained fiction of being a comfortable but modest businessman was about to crumble completely and irreversibly. The jet, the resources he could mobilize with a single phone call, everything would reveal he'd been lying by omission since they met. He might lose Catherine's trust completely, but none of that mattered right now compared to being there for her. The private jet landed at the small regional airfield just outside Pinewood around midnight. Katherine had stepped outside the hospital for air, needing a break from the sterile waiting room and her terrified thoughts about Margaret's critical condition. She happened to look toward the airfield visible in the distance and saw a private jet landing, its lights cutting through the darkness. Something made her watch as a figure emerged and got into a waiting car that headed toward town. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "I'm almost there. Hold on." Catherine's mind raced, connecting impossible dots. He'd been in Seattle 2 hours ago. The only way to get here this fast was by private jet. But Alexander was a modest businessman, not someone who owned private jets. Something wasn't right about his life, something he'd been hiding from her all along. Alexander rushed through the hospital entrance, finding Katherine in the waiting room looking exhausted, terrified, and now deeply confused as her eyes met his. "You came," she whispered, but her voice carried questions she couldn't ask yet, suspicions forming about who he really was beneath the modest persona he'd presented. Alexander pulled her into his arms, feeling her trembling against his chest. "Of course I came," he said quietly. "I'll always come when you need me." Katherine wanted to ask about the jet she'd seen, about how he'd gotten here impossibly fast, about what else he'd been hiding from her. But Margaret was fighting for her life in the ICU, and that was the only priority that truly mattered in this moment. Alexander stayed beside Katherine through the long night, holding her hand during updates from doctors, bringing her coffee she barely touched, showing unconditional love and support even as she sensed the foundation of their relationship cracking beneath unspoken truths that would eventually demand answers neither of them was ready to face yet. Patricia Stone had demanded a family dinner to meet Katherine after learning about her son's serious relationship with a woman from a small Oregon town. Alexander knew this dinner would be a test, an interrogation disguised as hospitality, but avoiding it would only make things worse with his controlling mother. He flew Katherine to New York, putting her up in a hotel and taking her shopping for an appropriate dress despite her protests about the expense. "My mother judges everything," Alexander warned her the evening before the dinner. "She's going to be cold and calculating. She'll ask invasive questions, trying to find weaknesses. I need you to be prepared for that." They arrived at the Stone family mansion in Upper East Side, a sprawling residence that screamed old money and generations of wealth and power. Katherine felt completely out of her depth looking at the imposing entrance with its marble columns and perfectly manicured grounds. Alexander squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Remember, you're worth 10 of anyone in there," he said quietly. "Your character, your strength, your genuine heart. Don't let them make you feel less than." Katherine took a deep breath, straightening her spine with the dignity that had carried her through poverty and loss. She wouldn't let these people intimidate her no matter how much money they had. Patricia Stone sat at the head of the enormous dining table like a queen holding court, her cold blue eyes assessing Katherine from the moment they entered the formal dining room. Marcus Stone, Alexander's younger brother, sat beside their mother with a neutral expression that revealed nothing. The dining room itself was designed to intimidate, with its priceless artwork, antique furniture, and crystal chandelier that probably cost more than Katherine had earned in her entire life. A staff member pulled out Katherine's chair, and she sat carefully, feeling every eye on her, as if analyzing whether she belonged in such refined company. Patricia wasted no time beginning her interrogation, disguised as polite dinner conversation. "So, Katherine, Alexander tells me you work as a waitress in Oregon," she said, her tone making the profession sound like something distasteful. "Tell me about your family background. Where did you attend university?" Katherine met her gaze steadily. "I didn't attend university," she answered honestly. "I married young and started working to support my family. After my husband died, I raised my daughter while working 2 jobs. Patricia's expression showed exactly what she thought of that answer. Disapproval radiating from every carefully controlled feature of her aristocratic face. The questions became more invasive and insulting as dinner progressed. Patricia asked about Catherine's financial situation, her debts, her family's medical problems, each question designed to highlight the enormous gap between Catherine's struggling working-class life and the Stone family's billionaire status. "How much debt are you carrying currently?" Patricia asked bluntly. "Do you have any assets of value? Any education or skills beyond food service?" Marcus watched silently, his expression unreadable, neither defending Katherine nor joining his mother's attack. Alexander's jaw clenched tighter with each question, his hand finding Katherine's under the table and squeezing it supportively. Patricia set down her wine glass and looked directly at Katherine with undisguised contempt. "Let me be direct, dear," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "What exactly can you offer my son? You have no education, no family wealth, no social connections of value. You come with a child in debt and an elderly grandmother requiring expensive medical care. Why shouldn't I see you as exactly what you appear to be? Someone who found a billionaire and saw an opportunity to escape poverty." The room fell silent, the cruelty of the question hanging in the air like poison. Katherine took a slow breath, meeting Patricia's cold blue eyes without flinching or showing the hurt those words had inflicted. When she spoke, her voice was calm and clear. "I can offer Alexander something money cannot buy, Mrs. Stone," she said quietly. "True love. Genuine care for who he is as a person, not what he's worth in dollars. I can offer honesty, loyalty, and a partnership built on respect rather than transaction. I understand those concepts might be foreign in a world where everything has a price tag, but they're priceless nonetheless." Several staff members in the room tried to hide surprised expressions at her eloquent response to Patricia's brutal attack. Alexander stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That's enough," he said, his voice cold and furious in a way Katherine had never heard before. "Katherine is the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I won't sit here while you insult her character and question her worth. She has more integrity in her little finger than most people in your social circle have in their entire beings. This dinner is over." Patricia's eyes widened, not accustomed to her son defying her so directly. "Alexander, sit down," she commanded. "I'm protecting you from making a terrible mistake." But Alexander was already helping Katherine from her chair, his protective hand on her back. They left the mansion with Patricia's angry voice following them, threatening to cut Alexander off from the family if he continued this relationship with someone so beneath their status. Alexander ignored her completely, focusing on getting Katherine out of that toxic environment as quickly as possible. Marcus stood in the doorway watching them leave, his expression still neutral, revealing nothing about whose side he was on in this family rupture. The driver opened the car door, and Katherine slid inside, her composure finally cracking now that they were away from Patricia's cold judgment and cruel interrogation that had stripped her dignity piece by piece. In the car, Katherine finally let the tears fall that she'd been holding back through sheer willpower during that brutal dinner. She cried not from the insults themselves, but from exhaustion of being judged unworthy, from the realization that Alexander's world would never accept her, from fear that love might not be enough to bridge the impossible gap between their lives. Alexander held her close, his own heart breaking watching her pain. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly. "I'll fix this. I'll make my family understand. I'll make them see what I see, that you're extraordinary." But Katherine pulled back slightly, wiping her tears with trembling hands. "Can you, though?" she whispered. "Can love really survive this, Alexander? Your mother is right about one thing. We're from completely different worlds. Maybe too different to ever truly work." Katherine returned to Pinewood after the disastrous dinner in New York, trying to rebuild her sense of normalcy and peace after Patricia Stone's brutal interrogation. She and Mia spent the afternoon baking cookies in their small kitchen, the simple domestic activity helping to ground Katherine after the overwhelming exposure to Alexander's world of wealth and cruelty. Mia chattered happily about school and friends, oblivious to the turmoil in her mother's heart. Alexander had returned to Seattle, but called every night, refusing to let the distance or his mother's disapproval weaken their relationship. He promised to visit Pinewood the following weekend, saying he had something important to ask her in person. In New York, Patricia Stone sat in her attorney's office, signing a contract with the city's most expensive and thorough private investigation firm. "I want everything," she said coldly. "Every detail of Katherine Hayes' past, her debts, her family history, her late husband's background, any questionable associations or behavior. Find me something I can use to prove to my son that this woman is completely unsuitable and likely after his money. Spare no expense and be discreet." The investigator nodded, accepting the substantial retainer check. Patricia was determined to protect her son from what she saw as an obvious gold digger, regardless of what methods were necessary to expose the truth. The following weekend, Alexander arrived in Pinewood carrying flowers and nervous energy Katherine had never seen from him before. After dinner that he prepared for Katherine and Mia, after helping clean up and reading Mia a bedtime story, he asked Katherine if they could talk in the living room. Mia peeked from her bedroom doorway, sensing something important was happening. Alexander took Katherine's hands, looking into her warm brown eyes with complete sincerity and love. "Katherine, you're the most genuine, strongest, most beautiful person I've ever known," he said. "I don't care what my family thinks or what society expects. I want to spend my life with you and Mia." He knelt down, opening a ring box. "Will you marry me?" Katherine felt tears stream down her face as she looked at Alexander kneeling in her modest living room, offering her everything despite knowing his family's opposition and the complications their different worlds created. She thought about saying no, about protecting him from the battle that would come, but the love in his eyes and the hope in Mia's face watching from the doorway made her choose happiness over fear. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Alexander slipped the ring on her finger, then pulled her into his arms as Mia ran over squealing with excitement, throwing her small arms around both of them. It was a simple, intimate moment witnessed only by the three people who would become a family, perfect in its quiet authenticity and genuine love. Alexander posted a simple announcement of their engagement on his rarely used social media that evening, including a photo of Katherine with the ring, smiling genuinely in her modest apartment. He didn't think about the thousands of followers who monitored his account, didn't consider how quickly news would spread through Seattle's elite circles and beyond into the wider world. Within an hour, the post had been shared hundreds of times. Within 3 hours, gossip blogs and society pages had picked up the story. Billionaire CEO Alexander Stone, engaged to small-town waitress, became the headline that launched a media firestorm neither of them was prepared to handle or survive intact. The harassment started the very next morning when Katherine arrived for her shift at Miller's Cafe. Customers she'd served for years suddenly stared at her with new eyes, some jealous, some judgmental, some fascinated by the real-life Cinderella story happening in their small town. Worse were the reporters with cameras gathered outside the cafe, shouting questions about how she'd met Alexander, whether she was pregnant, whether it was true she was a poor widow with a child. Mrs. Miller, the elderly owner, looked distressed by the disruption. "I'm so sorry," Katherine said, feeling her peaceful life crumbling. "I'll understand if you need to let me go until this dies down." But Mrs. Miller patted her hand kindly, though worry showed in her eyes about the unwanted attention. The cruelty reached Mia within days when several mothers at her elementary school, women married to wealthy men who resented Katherine's engagement to someone even richer, began poisoning their children against the sweet 7-year-old who'd done nothing wrong except have a mother they envied. Children who'd been Mia's friends suddenly avoided her, whispering "gold digger's daughter" and other terms they'd obviously learned from their parents. At lunch, Mia sat alone at a table where 3 other girls had sat just yesterday, confusion and hurt written across her innocent face as she tried to understand why everyone suddenly hated her when nothing about her had changed except the attention on her mother. Mia came home from school crying for the 3rd day in a row, and Katherine felt something inside her begin to break irreparably. Her daughter, innocent and pure-hearted, was suffering because of Katherine's choice to love Alexander, because she dared to cross social boundaries that protected the wealthy from people like them. Jennifer was there as always, providing support, but even her best friend looked troubled. "Is it worth it?" Jennifer asked carefully that evening after Mia finally cried herself to sleep. "I love Alexander, but watching what this is doing to your child..." "Katherine, maybe you need to really think about whether love is enough when it comes with this much pain for everyone involved, especially Mia, who didn't choose any of this." The pressure built until Katherine couldn't breathe under the weight of it anymore. Reporters followed her to work and waited outside Mia's school. Strangers sent hateful messages on social media, calling her a gold digger and worse. The private investigator Patricia hired was interviewing Katherine's former employers, digging through her past, looking for dirt to use against her. Alexander tried to protect them, hiring security and threatening legal action against the worst offenders, but he couldn't be everywhere at once and couldn't shield them from everything. One night, Katherine called him from the steps outside her apartment, her voice breaking. "Maybe we should end this," she said through sobs. "Maybe your mother was right. I can't watch Mia suffer anymore because I fell in love with someone from your world." Alexander felt his heart stop at Katherine's words, panic and determination warring inside him. "No," he said firmly, his voice carrying absolute conviction despite his own fear of losing her. "Katherine, listen to me. We're not giving up. I won't let my mother or the media or anyone else destroy what we have. I'm coming to Pinewood tomorrow with lawyers and security, and we're going to protect you and Mia properly. The harassment will stop. The bullying at Mia's school will stop. I have resources, and I'm going to use every single one of them to make sure you're both safe and protected. Please, Katherine, don't let them win. Don't let fear destroy our chance at happiness together. I love you too much to lose you without fighting with everything I have." Alexander stared out at Seattle's glittering skyline, knowing this battle was far from over, but refusing to surrender the woman he loved to a world determined to tear them apart. Patricia Stone stood at a podium in a luxury Manhattan hotel conference room, addressing a packed crowd of reporters and cameras from major news outlets she'd personally invited to this press conference. She wore her most expensive designer suit and her coldest expression, prepared to use her considerable social influence to destroy Katherine Hayes' reputation publicly and irrevocably. "I've called you here today to address my son Alexander Stone's unfortunate engagement," Patricia began, her voice carrying authority and contempt. "I want to make my position absolutely clear. I am completely opposed to this relationship. Katherine Hayes is wholly unsuitable for the Stone family, lacking the education, breeding, and social standing appropriate for someone in Alexander's position. This engagement is a mistake I will not support or recognize." Katherine watched the press conference from her modest Pinewood apartment, Jennifer beside her on the worn couch, both staring at the television screen in horror as Patricia Stone systematically destroyed Katherine's character in front of millions of viewers nationwide. "Miss Hayes is a waitress with no higher education, significant debts, and a child from a previous marriage," Patricia continued coldly. "She brings nothing of value to this union except financial burden. I believe she has specifically targeted my son for his wealth, and I will use every resource at my disposal to protect him from this obvious exploitation." Katherine felt sick, watching herself being portrayed as a scheming gold digger on national television by the mother of the man she loved desperately. Within hours, the story exploded across every tabloid and gossip website in the country. "The waitress who seduced a billionaire" became the dominant headline, accompanied by photos of Katherine in her simple work clothes at the cafe, contrasted with images of Alexander in expensive suits at corporate events. The narrative Patricia had crafted took hold. Poor single mother deliberately targets and manipulates naive billionaire, classic gold digger story. Social media erupted with opinions, most of them harsh and judgmental toward Katherine. Strangers who knew nothing about her or her genuine relationship with Alexander felt entitled to comment viciously on her character, her appearance, her worth as a human being, reducing her entire life and love to a mercenary transaction. The next morning, Mrs. Miller, the elderly cafe owner who'd employed Katherine for 3 years, called her into the small office with tears in her eyes and genuine regret written across her weathered face. "Katherine, I'm so sorry," Mrs. Miller said, unable to meet her eyes. "But I can't keep you on anymore. Ever since that press conference yesterday, I've had protesters outside, reporters harassing customers, people calling to complain. My regular customers are staying away because of all the attention and disruption. I wish I could be stronger, but I'm 76 years old and I can't handle this chaos. I'll give you 2 weeks severance pay, but I need you to stop coming in immediately." Katherine nodded numbly, another piece of her life crumbling under the weight of Patricia Stone's public crusade against her. That evening, Katherine sat at her small kitchen table, surrounded by bills and statements, trying to calculate how long she could survive on just her morning market job after losing the cafe income that had been essential to making ends meet. The numbers didn't work no matter how she arranged them. Rent, utilities, groceries, Mia's school expenses, Margaret's ongoing medical costs. She'd been barely managing with 2 jobs, living paycheck to paycheck with no safety net. Now, with only one income and a market job also at risk if the media attention continued, Katherine saw financial disaster approaching like a train she couldn't stop. She'd survived poverty before, but never with her child's well-being at stake and the entire nation watching her struggle with judgment rather than compassion. Katherine couldn't sleep that night, her mind spinning through impossible calculations and the crushing weight of everything collapsing around her. Around 2 in the morning, she sat at the kitchen table and began writing a letter to Alexander by hand, tears falling onto the paper as she poured out her heart. "My dearest Alexander," she wrote, "I love you more than I can express in words, but I can't do this anymore. Your mother's press conference destroyed what little I had left, my job, my reputation, my peace. Watching Mia suffer because of me, seeing strangers judge our love without knowing the truth, losing the ability to support my daughter because loving you made me a target. This isn't fair to you either. You deserve a partner who enhances your life rather than complicates it with scandal and division from your family. I need to let you go for your good and for Mia's protection." Jennifer arrived at Katherine's apartment at 6 in the morning, having sensed something was terribly wrong when Katherine's text the previous night had sounded increasingly desperate and final. She found Katherine at the kitchen table with a letter to Alexander sealed in an envelope, her face swollen from crying all night. Jennifer grabbed the letter before Katherine could stop her, reading it quickly and then looking at her best friend with fierce determination. "No," Jennifer said firmly. "You are not giving up. Not after everything you've fought through. Not after showing Mia how to be strong in the face of adversity. You taught your daughter never to give up when things get hard. You don't get to quit now just because a cruel old woman launched a public attack against you." Jennifer tore the letter into pieces before Katherine could protest, the fragments falling onto the kitchen table like confetti marking the death of surrender. "Listen to me," Jennifer continued passionately. "You love Alexander genuinely, and he loves you the same way. That's rare and precious and worth fighting for. Patricia Stone is a bully using her money and influence to break you because she can't control her adult son's choices. Are you really going to let her win? Are you going to teach Mia that powerful people always get their way, that love isn't worth defending when it gets difficult?" Katherine stared at the torn letter, something stirring inside her that had been buried under exhaustion and despair, a spark of the fighting spirit that had carried her through widowhood and poverty without breaking. Meanwhile, in New York, the private investigator Patricia had hired months ago to dig up dirt on Katherine entered her attorney's office with an expression that immediately caught Patricia's attention. "Mrs. Stone, my assistant discovered something in the final records review that you need to see immediately," he said, placing hospital documents on the desk before her. 3 years ago, Katherine Hayes was in New York with her dying husband. Presbyterian Hospital put out an emergency call for AB-negative blood donors during a critical shortage. Katherine responded and donated blood despite being in the middle of her own family crisis. Patricia looked at the documents impatiently, not understanding why this mattered. The investigator continued quietly. "That same day, your son Alexander was brought to that hospital after his car accident. The investigator placed a second document beside the first. Alexander's emergency room record from the car accident 3 years ago, showing massive blood loss requiring transfusions, his rare AB negative blood type, the timeline matching exactly with Katherine's donation. Katherine Hayes's blood saved your son's life 3 years before they ever met, the investigators said quietly. She had no idea who the patient was, never asked for recognition beyond the standard $50 donor fee. Her husband was dying in another hospital across town. She was broke and grieving, but she still took time to respond to that emergency call because someone needed her help. Patricia Stone stared at the records, her hands slowly rising to cover her mouth as the full impact hit her. The woman she'd spent months trying to destroy, the woman she'd publicly humiliated on national television, had saved Alexander's life without knowing him, without wanting anything, simply because she had the rare blood type he needed to survive surgery that day. Patricia Stone arrived in Pinewood unannounced, clutching hospital records that would change everything. Katherine opened her door, shocked to see the woman who'd publicly destroyed her standing there with red, tearful eyes. "Please, I need to speak with you," Patricia said quietly. Inside, Patricia placed the records on Katherine's coffee table with trembling hands. 3 years ago, you donated blood at Presbyterian Hospital in New York, Patricia began. AB negative, extremely rare. That same day, Alexander was in a car accident requiring emergency transfusions. Your blood saved my son's life, Katherine. You saved him without knowing who he was, without asking for anything beyond the $50 payment. Katherine stared at the records in shock, vaguely remembering that donation during the nightmare of her husband's death, needing that money desperately, but never knowing whose life she'd saved. Tears streamed down Patricia's face for the first time in decades as the full weight of her mistake crushed her. You saved my son when you yourself were struggling to survive, Patricia sobbed. You were broke, grieving your dying husband, but you still helped a stranger because it was right. You didn't know about Alexander's wealth, didn't seek recognition. And instead of thanking you, I investigated you, publicly humiliated you, destroyed your job and reputation. I judged you by your poverty rather than your character. Patricia's voice broke completely. Katherine, you have more integrity than anyone in my world. You loved Alexander genuinely before knowing about his money. You were willing to walk away to protect Mia from my cruelty. I was horrifically wrong. I'm begging for your forgiveness, not because I deserve it, but because you're clearly a far better person than I'll ever be. Katherine looked at Patricia's outstretched hand, seeing genuine remorse in eyes that had been so cold at that terrible dinner. Despite justified anger, despite the pain Patricia had caused her and Mia, Katherine recognized that holding hatred would only poison her own heart and damage her future with Alexander. I forgive you, Katherine said quietly, taking Patricia's hand. Not because what you did was okay. You hurt us terribly. But I forgive you because your remorse is real, and because Alexander loves you despite your mistakes. If we're going to be family, we need to start fresh from this moment. Patricia squeezed Katherine's hand. Overwhelmed by grace she didn't deserve from someone she'd tried to destroy, finally understanding why her son had fallen so deeply in love with this extraordinary woman of genuine character and strength. The next morning, Patricia stood at the same podium where she'd condemned Katherine, but this time Katherine stood beside her as Patricia addressed the media. I publicly attacked Katherine Hayes, calling her unsuitable for my family, Patricia began. I was completely wrong. She held up hospital records. 3 years ago, Katherine saved my son Alexander's life by donating rare blood during his emergency surgery. She was watching her own husband die, struggling financially, but helped a stranger without knowing his identity or asking for anything beyond $50. Katherine has shown more character in her modest life than I've shown in my privileged one. She deserves my gratitude and profound public apology. Marcus stepped forward. I'm Alexander's brother. I stayed silent while Katherine was attacked. I've watched my brother with her. He's never been happier. Katherine, I apologize and hope you'll accept me as your brother. Within hours, public opinion shifted dramatically, celebrating Katherine as a guardian angel rather than gold digger. That evening, the Stone family gathered at the mansion where Katherine had been interrogated months earlier, but now the atmosphere radiated genuine acceptance. Patricia knelt before Mia. "I'm so sorry for hurting you," she said gently. "Your mother is extraordinary, and you're a wonderful little girl." Mia threw her arms around Patricia in childlike forgiveness. They sat at the same dining table, but Patricia insisted Katherine sit in the place of honor, treating her with deserved respect. Marcus embraced Katherine like the sister she would become. Margaret and Patricia bonded over wedding plans like old friends. In the garden at sunset, Alexander and Katherine looked at a calendar while Patricia and Mia discussed flowers nearby. 3 months from now, Katherine suggested, pointing to June. Alexander pulled her close. "Perfect. After learning you saved my life before we met, I believe we were meant to find each other." Katherine looked around at the family that had become her champions, feeling she finally belonged. Not because she'd changed, but because she'd remained true to herself, proving character transcends economic circumstances and love conquers all obstacles. The wedding day arrived 3 months after Patricia's public apology transformed Katherine's story from scandal to triumph. The ceremony took place in a simple church Katherine had chosen, not a grand cathedral, honoring her values over ostentation. The pews filled with an extraordinary mix. Manhattan's elite sitting beside Pinewood's working-class residents, Alexander's business associates mingling with Katherine's cafe co-workers, society matrons chatting with Margaret's church friends. It was exactly the kind of wedding that represented their love story, bridging two worlds through genuine connection that transcended money and status. Mia stood near the altar in her flower girl dress, ready for her important role as Dama de Honra, her face glowing with excitement and pride at seeing her mother marry the man who'd become like a father to her. Katherine walked down the aisle with Jennifer beside her, not to give her away, but representing the chosen family that had supported her through every struggle when blood family was gone. Every head turned to watch, but Katherine only had eyes for Alexander, standing at the altar in his perfectly tailored suit, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he watched the woman who'd saved his life twice walk toward him. Mia scattered rose petals with serious concentration ahead of them. Patricia sat in the front pew, crying tears of joy and gratitude. Marcus smiled, genuinely beside her. When Katherine reached the altar and Alexander took her hands, the love between them was so palpable that several guests openly wept at witnessing something so rare and precious in a world that often valued everything except genuine connection. When it came time for vows, Alexander and Katherine had written their own, rejecting traditional words that didn't capture their extraordinary journey. Alexander spoke first. "Katherine, you saved my life before you knew me. You loved me when you thought I was nobody special. You fought for us when my world tried to tear us apart. You taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in genuine connection. I promise to honor your strength, cherish your heart, protect your dreams, and build a life where love always matters more than money or status." Katherine spoke through tears, but with clear, strong voice. "Alexander, I fell in love with you in a cafe before I knew about billions or empires. You respected my independence. You protected Mia and me when your world attacked us. You chose love over family approval. I promise to be your partner, your equal, your home where you can always be yourself. I promise to raise our children to value character over wealth, kindness over status, and love above everything else this world tells us matters." When a minister pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander pulled Katherine into a kiss that sealed not just their marriage, but the triumph of authentic love over social barriers and prejudice. Guests erupted in thunderous applause as Mia jumped excitedly. Patricia wept openly, fully redeemed through witnessing this union she'd once tried to destroy. Marcus smiled with genuine happiness for his brother. Margaret dabbed her eyes, grateful to see Katherine find real love again. The ceremony ended with the minister's words echoing through the church. Let this marriage remind us all that true love knows no class boundaries, that dignity is defined by character, not bank accounts, and that when two people refuse to let the world's judgment destroy their connection, love conquers everything. The message was clear. Wealth and status meant nothing compared to the power of two people choosing each other with complete authenticity and unwavering commitment despite every obstacle society placed in their path. At the reception, Katherine caught the bouquet she'd tossed and then addressed the gathered guests with heartfelt words. This journey taught me that faith means believing in love even when the world tells you it's impossible, she said, her voice carrying across the room. Perseverance means refusing to give up on what's real and true, even when powerful forces try to convince you that you're not worthy or good enough. Never let anyone define your value by your bank account or social status. Never let judgment from people who don't know your heart make you doubt what you know is genuine. Hold on to love, hold on to faith, and never stop fighting for what matters most. Guests applauded through tears, moved by her grace and strength. As the evening ended, Alexander, Katherine, and Mia walked together out of the reception toward the car that would take them to begin their new life as a family. The setting sun cast golden light on them as they held hands, a billionaire CEO, a former waitress, and a 7-year-old girl, proving that families are built on love, not money, that character matters more than privilege, and that when you stay true to who you are despite the world's pressure to change, you find belonging not by conforming, but by having the courage to be authentically yourself until the right people recognize your worth. The wedding day arrived 3 months after Patricia's public apology transformed Katherine's story from scandal to triumph. The ceremony took place in a simple church Katherine had chosen, not a grand cathedral, honoring her values over ostentation. The pews filled with an extraordinary mix. Manhattan's elite sitting beside Pinewood's working-class residents, Alexander's business associates mingling with Katherine's cafe co-workers, society matrons chatting with Margaret's church friends. It was exactly the kind of wedding that represented their love story, bridging two worlds through genuine connection that transcended money and status. Mia stood near the altar in her flower girl dress, ready for her important role as Dama de Honra, her face glowing with excitement and pride at seeing her mother marry the man who'd become like a father to her. Katherine walked down the aisle with Jennifer beside her, not to give her away, but representing the chosen family that had supported her through every struggle when blood family was gone. Every head turned to watch, but Katherine only had eyes for Alexander, standing at the altar in his perfectly tailored suit, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he watched the woman who'd saved his life twice walk toward him. Mia scattered rose petals with serious concentration ahead of them. Patricia sat in the front pew, crying tears of joy and gratitude. Marcus smiled genuinely beside her. When Katherine reached the altar and Alexander took her hands, the love between them was so palpable that several guests openly wept at witnessing something so rare and precious in a world that often valued everything except genuine connection. When it came time for vows, Alexander and Katherine had written their own, rejecting traditional words that didn't capture their extraordinary journey. Alexander spoke first. "Katherine, you saved my life before you knew me. You loved me when you thought I was nobody special. You fought for us when my world tried to tear us apart. You taught me that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in genuine connection. I promise to honor your strength, cherish your heart, protect your dreams, and build a life where love always matters more than money or status." Katherine spoke through tears, but with clear, strong voice. "Alexander, I fell in love with you in a cafe before I knew about billions or empires. You respected my independence. You protected Mia and me when your world attacked us. You chose love over family approval. I promise to be your partner, your equal, your home where you can always be yourself. I promise to raise our children to value character over wealth, kindness over status, and love above everything else this world tells us matters." When a minister pronounced them husband and wife, Alexander pulled Katherine into a kiss that sealed not just their marriage, but the triumph of authentic love over social barriers and prejudice. Guests erupted in thunderous applause as Mia jumped excitedly. Patricia wept openly, fully redeemed through witnessing this union she'd once tried to destroy. Marcus smiled with genuine happiness for his brother. Margaret dabbed her eyes, grateful to see Katherine find real love again. The ceremony ended with the minister's words echoing through the church. Let this marriage remind us all that true love knows no class boundaries, that dignity is defined by character, not bank accounts, and that when two people refuse to let the world's judgment destroy their connection, love conquers everything. The message was clear. Wealth and status meant nothing compared to the power of two people choosing each other with complete authenticity and unwavering commitment despite every obstacle society placed in their path. At the reception, Katherine caught the bouquet she'd tossed and then addressed the gathered guests with heartfelt words. This journey taught me that faith means believing in love even when the world tells you it's impossible, she said, her voice carrying across the room. Perseverance means refusing to give up on what's real and true, even when powerful forces try to convince you that you're not worthy or good enough. Never let anyone define your value by your bank account or social status. Never let judgment from people who don't know your heart make you doubt what you know is genuine. Hold on to love, hold on to faith, and never stop fighting for what matters most. Guests applauded through tears, moved by her grace and strength. As the evening ended, Alexander, Katherine, and Mia walked together out of the reception toward the car that would take them to begin their new life as a family. The setting sun cast golden light on them as they held hands. A billionaire CEO, a former waitress, and a 7-year-old girl, proving that families are built on love, not money, that character matters more than privilege, and that when you stay true to who you are despite the world's pressure to change, you find belonging not by conforming, but by having the courage to be authentically yourself until the right people recognize your worth. This story touched hearts around the world, reminding viewers that true love conquers all barriers. Comments poured in from those inspired by Katherine and Alexander's journey. Likes multiplied as people shared this tale of dignity, perseverance, and faith triumphing over judgment and prejudice. Subscribers joined, eager for more stories proving that love built on genuine character will always prevail over shallow materialism and social divisions.